Welcome back to my channel, Dr. Hart MD. I'm Dr. Digoma. This video series is called Coronary Calcium Scoring, Detecting Heart Disease at the Earlier Stages. It is atherosclerosis versus the science of early plaque detection. In this video, some call themselves lucky, while many unlucky, referring to those who just dropped dead from their first heart attack. Coronary calcium scoring tests can help remove the term unlucky by giving unsuspecting people a chance on living. The science behind coronary calcium scoring and the medical therapy that follows in later videos can be explained in a way that is easily understood, even without a medical background. One thing we learned in 2020 is how much we are willing to do to survive this pandemic. We experience what it's like to be in a war against something deadly that we can't even see. Thankfully, science came to our rescue and is leading us out of this pandemic. The science behind heart attack prevention can also show us the way out of this heart attack epidemic. Okay, let's start our Zoom meeting. Before we start, let me explain about the thumbnail. We all know that we have a cardiovascular disease care industry. Its revenue are generated by heart disease. More people with heart disease, more procedures, more hospitalization, more revenues. By the time we reach the age of 50, most of us will have many silent plaques in our coronary arteries. 10, 20, 30, or even more, like this. Any plaque has the potential to rupture and cause a heart attack. That means a revenue for the hospital. And without appropriate medical therapy, a plaque may rupture every few years, each time requiring a hospitalization and expensive procedures. A plaque may rupture every few years. Eventually, heart failure develops. That means more hospitalization, even perhaps a defibrillator. Over a period of 10 years, a person not receiving optimal medical therapy may have 5 to 10 hospitalizations plus many expensive cardiac procedures. If the plaques are detected earlier by calcium scoring with optimal medical therapy, all these hospitalizations and all these procedures can be avoided, even the premature death. In my second video, and heart attack epidemic, know your calcium score, I ask you to watch the Videomaker documentary in YouTube and email your questions. And some of you did. The first question is from Val. The title, The Widowmaker, does it refer to just older men? Before I continue, I want to thank David Babbitt and Ivor Cummings of the Irish Heart Disease Awareness for granting permission to use video clips from the Widowmaker. I also want to thank the patient and the families featured in these video clips who willingly shared their stories and their loss in the hopes that it might help someone else, like you or someone you know. The answer is no. It affects men and women, white, black, Hispanic, Asians, few in their 30s, but mostly older, more commonly after the age 50. About one-third will die without reaching the hospital. Of those that get to the hospital, another 15% will die during their hospitalization. Most of the survivals will need a stent, some even a heart bypass. The title comes from the deadliest of all heart attacks, one involving the left main coronary artery, the largest artery of the heart. There are three components to a heart attack: a cholesterol-filled plaque, a tear on the covering of the plaque, or what we call plaque rupture, and a blood clot on top of the plaque, which completely blocks the artery. The second worst artery is the proximal LAD, or left anterior descending coronary artery. A heart attack involving the left main coronary artery is a massive heart attack with very low survival rate. The proximal LAD heart attack is still very bad. When we hear that someone dropped dead of a heart attack, the first thing that comes to our mind is it involved the left main or the proximal LAD. Here are some life-changing stories.
911, please, fire.
911, my husband's having a heart attack.
We're going to start CPR on him, okay? I'm going to tell you what to do.
Okay.
Okay? Are you
Okay.
right next to him?
Yeah.
Okay, put him flat on the floor on his back.
Okay.
Expose his chest.
Expose his chest.
Kneel by his side.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Put the heel of your hand in the center of his chest, right between the nipples.
Okay.
Push down firmly with only the heels of your hands, 2 inches.
Okay.
And do it 30 times like you're pumping the chest. I'm going to count. I want you to go this fast as I'm counting. 1,
Okay.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
2/3 of men and half of all women, the first sign or symptom is that they have a heart attack or die. You don't know you have it until you're dead.
And it doesn't have to be that way.
Heart attacks and strokes are absolutely preventable. The science is slam dunk.
My whole life, I've been an athlete. I've been a husband. I've been an attorney. People have always relied upon me to provide for them. On May 6, 2009, I was playing softball on a field just like the one behind me. Sat down in the dugout in between innings. Had no warning signs, no complaints. I didn't feel sick or anything like that. Next thing you know, I woke up in an ambulance, somebody telling me how lucky I was. What happened, I learned, is that I was sitting in the dugout and I just passed over. I was clinically dead for 3 to 5 minutes. I was told I had no pulse. I was turning blue. Fortunately, two mothers kept me sustainable by doing CPR on me, and I woke up in the ambulance. I didn't know what happened, and the ambulance driver said to me, "You're a very lucky guy," and I really couldn't figure out why I was so lucky.
Not everybody is so lucky. Every minute of every day, somebody dies of a heart attack in America. It's the nation's biggest killer. More frightening than that is that a huge number of the people who die drop dead without any warning they've got heart disease.
About a third of patients, the first event is sudden death.
Met Margaret on the southeast side of Cleveland, Ohio, which pretty much borders the beginning of the suburbs. I was 11 years old at that particular time. Margaret would have been 13. We actually came together when I came back from the Marine Corps. I decided to go back to the old neighborhood just to see who was hanging out. And the only person that was standing there when I got there was Margaret. She was standing in her front yard watering her mom's roses. And I walked up and said, "Hey." And the rest is history. And in 2006, trusted in God, we were enrolled in Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California.
Oh boy, here comes the sign. My name is Margaret Monroe, and I'm a second-year student at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary.
Her first weekend on call, she preached for the hospital community and was on her way back to the supervisor's office. She had a massive coronary, and she died. And truly, my whole life stopped at that moment.
More women die of heart disease than men in the States every year since 1983. So it's a huge problem among women. 5 times as many women die of heart attack as breast cancer. Yet very few women have any knowledge of that or any inkling of concern about heart disease compared to breast cancer. So when we talk about the mammogram of the heart, that's at least 5 times more important to women than the mammogram of the breast.
Did you know that? Heart attack is most commonly thought of to be mostly a problem in men. But more women than men die from heart attack every year. at least in the US. Most women and most doctors don't even know that. Insurance pays for women to have a routine mammogram to detect breast cancer earlier. No one questioned that it's sensible to detect breast cancer earlier before it can spread. And doing that saves lives and avoid more expensive treatments later. Yet insurance refuses to pay for a coronary calcium scoring, a $100 approved test that can potentially not just save lives, but also avoid the need for expensive procedures by detecting atherosclerosis or plaque buildup earlier before they can cause all these problems.
There's one last key opponent, the insurance industry. They won't pay for the test. Ironically, the headquarters of Giants health insurer Kaiser Permanente are just across the bay from the offices where the very first scanners are installed. In the early 1980s, the Kaiser board come calling.
We met with the Kaiser executives. Of course, most of them came in to be scanned. And some of the Kaiser researchers did some excellent research on coronary calcium screening, published research.
But that didn't mean they'd pay out for their policyholders to have one.
They said, we're not interested because our typical patients are only in the plan for 5 years or less. And this is a long-term cost savings. So the cost savings will go to our competitor. And no need to single out one particular health maintenance organization. All the insurance companies told us basically the same story, that their patients are not long-term holders of that plan. So if they reduce cost over the long term, it means nothing to them. It only goes to their competitor.
We contact the big insurance companies, Kaiser and the rest, to find out why they will still pay for a $50,000 stent, but not unless you're very lucky, a $100 test. But they won't talk. Then one man is brave enough to break the wall of silence. He's been the public face of two of the big five as their media spokesman.
I was a journalist, a newspaper reporter for some time, but then I got into public relations work, and I realized toward the end of my career that something had happened to what I was doing for a living, and it just dawned on me that in many cases I was doing the exact opposite of what I was trying to do as a journalist, which was to try to find truth and as best I could report it to do that. It sounds kind of trite, but I did look in the mirror and say, what happened to you? How did this happen to you? The system is not set up to reward prevention. The system is set up so that doctors are well compensated for treating conditions. So are pharmaceutical companies. We mainly have a disease industry in this country.
We've got a healthcare system that's out of control, spending an incredible amount of our national wealth, not making people better. We've developed a system that's based upon putting out the fires, taking people with chronic diseases and doing all these things to them.
There is just not nearly enough attention paid to trying to help keep people from getting sick, from getting congestive heart failure, from getting the kinds of illnesses that require stents and being put on maintenance drugs and having expensive care for the rest of their lives. They don't want them to die, but they don't necessarily want them to get better.
We had spent the 4th of July at our home here in East Elmhurst, and we had a nice family barbecue, and we were hanging out, and you wouldn't think that anything was just any normal day. The next morning, my husband, we have a home in Fort Lauderdale, went to our summer home, and he called me when he arrived, and he said, I arrived, everything's okay, and I carried along my merry way to work. I was in a meeting, and my phone kept ringing, but I ignored it. I continued along in the meeting because you cannot answer a phone in a meeting. But then my son's number, his cell phone number, showed up on my phone. So I answered that call. And my son told me that he received the call and that something had happened to Dad. At that point, my phone rang again, and it was the police calling. And they told me that they rushed my husband to the hospital. Next thing I know, calls were made, and I was on board an aircraft so I can get there. And that plane just never took off because just as they were about to close the doors, they got another phone call. The person on the other end said to me, "Are you alone?" And I said, "No, I'm on a plane full of people. I'm not alone." And they said, "You know, we're calling about your husband." I said, "I know, tell him I'm on my way, I'm coming." And they said, "No, no one told you, he's gone." It was something I couldn't believe because there were no symptoms. We just spoke, and within a couple hours, my whole life changed. Sorry. Alpha was slim, 6'3". Yeah, occasional, social smoker, but he wasn't like packs a day, and he was just healthy. I felt like I was still walking in a. It was a nightmare. I mean, I thought, this can't be happening. Is this really real? That particular day, the 4th of July, was just the best time of our life. I mean, we just had a great time. I mean, and the next day, it was just a memory.
California has a governor going places, Pete Wilson. Some talk of him as a potential president. His key aide is Otto Boss, an energetic press liaison in his mid-40s.
He was somebody important. I do remember that. Everybody knew him, and he was the guy behind the guy. So if you wanted to talk to Pete, everybody knew basically you had to go through Otto. So it was pretty cool. So everybody knew me as Otto's kid, and of course I was his firstborn, so everybody treated me like a rock star. So trust me, it was a great life, and everybody's kind of like, oh, that's Otto's kid. Be nice to him. June 2nd was, oh gosh, it's like yesterday. We were actually playing baseball out here on the front street. And my mother was inside here with our neighbor, and I was called in by our neighbor to, hey, can you please come in and talk to your mom? And I was a 15-year-old kid, so I'm like, yeah, lady, I'll come in when I want to come in. And then she came back out and she was like, no, seriously, you need to come talk to your mother now. She was sitting on the corner of the bed, and she basically just said that my dad had a heart attack and he was at the hospital. I was thinking, okay, he had a heart attack, he'll be fine. Because basically, in my eyes, my dad was like Superman, and nothing ever could really, do anything to him. We went to that hospital, and then when we got there, a doctor pulled my mother aside, and they kept going in and out, in and out, in and out. And then my mom came out, and she was very, very tearful. I knew something was really bad, because I kept going, when are we going to see my dad? And then, long story short, the doctor sat down in front of me about where you are, and just told me that my father had passed, and this is what had happened, and I was a little confused, one, why he was telling me, and not my mother, but they say his arteries were clogged. He looked young. He would never guess that he was 47. He had a rockin' tan, because he was always playing soccer. There was no indication that he was gonna have the type of heart failure that he had.
What about your mom?
She's okay. I mean, she's never gone on another date. I don't think she's even ever talked to anybody about going on another date. I think we've told her to go out on another date, but she won't. And if you bring it up to her now, she still will break out in tears and get very emotional. It definitely messes with you a lot.
Steve was the warmest guy, friendly, caring, easygoing, good-natured. He would just he has the patience and the heart of gold to listen to people and care about them, and he was full of empathy. When we met, I was 20, he was 23. He had his own clothing store, active clothing wear store. And I had to come in to get my matching headband for my aerobics outfit. And he did not have the color I needed, so I came back and we hit it off. 4 days prior, we had just gotten back from Cancun, Mexico. We were there for a week. We had a relaxing time, you know, just a fun getaway, just he and I, no kids. Our daughters were 2 and 5, so it was nice to get away from the kids. He came home from work about 6 o'clock that night, rushing to get out. It was his first league basketball game of the year. So he put on his jersey and rushing. He gave me a kiss goodbye. And that was at about 6:30 at night. At 10 o'clock that night is when I got the phone call from the manager at the gym that said, your husband's had an accident. So I said, what happened now? Thinking he just, he broke his ankle or sprained something. And he said, well, his heart stopped and they can't start it. You know, it's surreal driving to a hospital not knowing if your spouse is going to be alive or not, or in a vegetative state or not. And, you're making deals with, with God. Like, I said, I want him to be alive, but I want him to be healthy. I don't want him to be a vegetable. That wouldn't be any kind of quality of life for either of us. Sure enough, I got to the hospital, ran in, and the emergency room doctor told me that they could not resuscitate him. And he was dead. And I asked to see him. He was still sweaty from playing basketball and still tan from Cancun. And yeah, he just, it was like a joke. I said, okay, I'm here, joke's over, you can wake up. And no, he didn't wake up. Steve ate well, he did not smoke, and he worked out. So, who knows, he was actually carrying around 4 clogged arteries.
Every time I read the newspaper and I see, a 45-year-old or a 55-year-old or a 62-year-old person just drop dead of a heart attack unsuspectingly, it's a little disheartening because I know that life would have easily been saved.
To me, being a poor physicist, it was the same. Let's get rid of heart disease because heart attacks are completely preventable. So let's find out who is on the road to having a heart attack, screen them, and eliminate it.
After a decade of fierce debates among prominent cardiology leaders of opposing interests, coronary calcium scoring was officially approved by the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology in 2013. Even those who were strongly opposed to it were forced to give in because scientific facts became self-evident. Like Dr. Budoff said, you don't have to be a doctor to understand that. The science backing it is easily understood. It's not like the weird but true science of quantum mechanics. It is not like wave-particle duality or quantum entanglement. If those that oppose it continue to still oppose it, they will be shaming themselves, look like fools. And as Dr. Heck said, like walking in the wilderness alone. Surprisingly, steadfast in their opposition are the big and powerful insurance companies, and even Medicare. They still refuse to pay for the $100 approved test. The question is why?
Despite the fact that most insurers still won't pay for it, more and more people are going for a scan. After sewing up a big business deal in the US, Irish entrepreneur David Bobbitt went to have a medical checkup. Part of it, a coronary artery scan. He had the shock of his life.
My arteries were that of an 86-year-old. So here is a 51-year-old who exercises every day, is careful what they eat. My parents lived into the 80s. I'd done all of the things you were supposed to do to be healthy. The following day I had to go in to do an angiogram where they found I had one totally blocked artery, I had another artery that was 70% blocked, and I had a huge level of disease right throughout my system. The shock of it, the shock of suddenly going from one day feeling absolutely perfect with no reasons of any issue at all, to a situation that 75 out of 100 people at your level of calcification is going to either be dead or have a heart attack in the next 10 years.
Today, he's going to be scanned again. Told he could die at any moment, he spent the last 2 years on the most punishing of fitness and food regimes.
I've done everything I can do, and the score will be the score. My mathematical mind says it was 900. 1100 will be okay. 1200 will be reasonable, and over 1200 score will be very disappointing.
Remember, leave your arms above your head for the entire test.
Now taking a deep breath.
Plenty of height there.
There is. And your LAD then. See?
You know, there's a huge level of plaque there, you know? So you just wait to see what the result is, you know? That's all we can do.
Hi. All right, so just to sort of compare, your total score is 1028 and previously 906. Now, there's a little bit of motion artifact, and so Dr. Kennedy thinks this is a little artificially increased. When we look at the number of lesions, that's something else that you can look at if there's a little bit of motion. So in the past, you had 28, and now you have 33, which really isn't very different.
Yeah.
And so this is good news.
Yeah. I'm very happy with that. I'm very happy with that, because I've worked, you wouldn't want to believe how hard I've worked. I've really worked on everything.
The disease has barely advanced. David's still in a very high-risk group, but for now, there's real hope he can make it.
The fact that I could be around like any father wants to be with his kids. The fact that I was, my daughters, that I just so special that I would be there when they got married, or when they were that bit older, that I'd see my grandchildren. That gave me hope. That really was what really was so important, why I wanted to fight this as hard as I did.
Without the shock of that first scan, David might not have changed his life around, might not have been here today for his family. But now the hope he has can be shared by millions. Across the US, doctors prefer to intervene after an attack with a stent rather than prevent it with a scan, despite the fact that the unexpected death toll is by now over 3.5 million.
Okay, let's go to the second question. And this is from John. I asked both my cardiologist and my primary care physician to order a coronary calcium score for me. I am 50 years old and an ex-smoker. They both refused because they told me that I'm fine, and I already had a nuclear stress test 2 years ago, which was normal. Is that true? No, it's not true. A normal stress test does not mean that there's nothing wrong with your heart. You can have 12 or more plaques in your coronary arteries, and your stress test can still be normal. Watch this next video about President Clinton.
We're here outside New York Presbyterian Hospital. In just a couple of hours, President Bill Clinton, former president, is scheduled to undergo surgery to bypass diseased vessels in his heart.
In 2004, former President Clinton checks himself into hospital with chest pain, only to discover he has chronic heart disease and needs an immediate quintuple bypass.
But many people are asking, how could a former president who gets regular checkups end up so suddenly with heart disease? Clinton bragged last night that he had aced his stress tests for 4 or 5 years in a row.
I just had the pleasure of meeting past President Clinton last Thursday, and he told this story about how he went through 5 treadmills while in office. He was cleared 5 times, told he was doing great. They stopped his cholesterol medication. He actually told me he had a calcium scan. That was abnormal, but his doctors didn't really do anything with it, and ultimately he needed 5-way bypass. He
did very well initially on the South Beach diet, went back to his high school rate, did a lot of exercise, was on a statin, and he stopped the statin, is my understanding, because he lost weight.
President Clinton's cardiologist made two critical mistakes. One, ignoring the abnormal coronary calcium score because the stress test was normal. And second, stopping his statin because he lost weight and started a healthier diet, which allowed his plaques to continue to grow. Continuing his medications could have avoided or at least delayed the need to have a heart bypass. His coronary scan could have looked like this, showing many calcified plaques, those marked segments in multiple arteries. Since the plaques were not causing severe obstruction, his nuclear heart scan was normal, like shown above, with the entire left ventricle uniformly bright. Only when the obstruction is severe enough, like 80% as shown above, does the nuclear heart scan becomes abnormal, showing a big portion of the left ventricle remaining dark instead of bright yellow. You can see for yourself the sharp contrast between a normal and an abnormal nuclear heart scan. Our last question is from Marie. My 62-year-old uncle died suddenly last month from a heart attack. He was the picture of good health, and according to my aunt, nothing seemed wrong with him. Why is dropping dead so common in heart attacks, which does not give people a second chance?
A major heart attack lasts only minutes. One moment the heart is beating normally, all four chambers moving in that familiar rhythm. Suddenly, a coronary artery blocks. The flow of blood to the heart stops. The heart starts to beat wildly. There are now only moments left to save the victim's life.
27, 28, 29, 30. Start again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
And if that attempt fails, starved of oxygen, the heart dies. And so does the victim.
The heart is both a pumping muscle organ and an electrical organ. The synchronized electric activity starts first, followed within a fraction of a second by a mechanical contraction of the heart. During the early phase of a heart attack, when the heart damage is just starting, the lack of blood flow to the heart muscle can trigger a rapid, chaotic, disorganized electrical rhythm, marked here with a red arrow, causing rapid quivering of the ventricles. The heart is no longer pumping blood. There is no palpable pulse, no blood pressure. The rhythm is ventricular flutter followed by ventricular fibrillation. If there is no quick intervention, the heart rhythm eventually becomes flat and the patient dies.
In the beginning, I think everybody was extremely interested, and everybody would say, well, what's that white stuff that I see there? And I said, well, that's calcium in the coronary arteries.
Calcium, a crucial ingredient in our bones and just what you don't want in your heart.
The calcium's actually part of the healing process. When we develop deposits of cholesterol in the wall of the artery, one of the body's natural defense mechanisms is to put down calcium to try to heal this sort of bubble. So in and of itself, it doesn't cause the disease. What it does, though, is it doesn't occur there unless there is plaque there. But if you have a coronary scan and you see calcium, you know you have disease. It's not a risk factor. It is looking at the disease, part of the disease process. We could have gotten there, in a perfect world, we could have gotten there in 3 to 5 years. We'd all gotten behind it in the beginning.
Well, and so what?
Well, how many lives do you think would have been saved if we'd done it in 1990, what we're doing now in 2013?
And the answer is?
In the 30 years since coronary artery scanning was invented, over 4 million people have died without any warning. That's the equivalent of half the population of New York City dropping dead. And most of these people could have been saved.
Well, I mean, so, you know, there's this old saying that truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed, then it is violently opposed, finally, it is accepted as being self-evident.